Hello, and welcome to episode 1, Using the Master's Tools. Said versus Hallaq, right here on Resistance 101, Palestine and the Global Awakening Masterclass. I am your host, and I'm genuinely thrilled you are joining us for this first session.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's great to be kicking this off.
Absolutely. So today we're looking at the actual machinery of how we think about liberation. But before we jump in, a quick note to you listening. We are going to be unpacking some highly charged political and intellectual material today, drawing from sources across the spectrum.
Right.
And we want to be totally clear up front. We are not taking sides or endorsing these viewpoints, whether left-wing or right-wing. Our mission today is just to impartially report on the content provided in these texts and convey the ideas as they were originally written.
Exactly. We're just, mapping out the territory for you.
Right, mapping it out. And the territory today is huge. Usually when people think of Palestinian resistance in the world of ideas, there's just one name that towers over everything. Edward Said.
Oh, yeah. Said he's the monolithic figure for most people.
But the reality is that the intellectual history here isn't a monolith at all. It is defined by this massive seismic tension between two absolute giants, Edward Said on one hand and Wael Hallaq on the other.
Which is such a fascinating conflict.
Yeah.
Because it really boils down to that classic dilemma, right?
Master's tools.
Yes. Can you use the master's tools, meaning Western critical theory, Enlightenment concepts, to dismantle the master's house?
Or, and this is Hallaq's side, is the house itself just so corrupt, so fundamentally structurally unsound that you have to abandon it and build something entirely different using your own indigenous heritage?
Precisely. It's the core debate of universalism versus particularism.
So on one side, we've got this hypothesis about Edward Said, which the sources call the Western first, Palestine second argument.
Right. The idea that he fought for Palestine but used the exact same European tools that justified colonialism in the first place.
And then Hallaq steps in, arguing for what he calls epistemic freedom, like a total, complete break from Western structures of knowledge.
And, for everyone listening, we really need to emphasize that this isn't just some academic spat in an ivory tower somewhere.
No, not at all.
It's a battle over the soul of identity. It's about governance, law, and what the word freedom actually means in a post-colonial reality.
So let's unpack the first giant, Edward Said. Even if you haven't read his big book, Orientalism, you probably know the vibe.
Oh, for sure.
He's the secular intellectual in the Ivy League, the guy who seemingly exists everywhere and nowhere all at once.
Yeah, Saad really cultivated that persona of the exile. He actually saw himself as the amateur.
Which sounds weird today.
Right, but he didn't mean unskilled. He meant it in the sense of doing something for the pure love of it, totally unbound by, professional dogma or narrow academic specialization.
So he could zoom out?
Exactly. He believed that being in between cultures gave him the critical distance needed to speak truth to power.
Yeah.
He wasn't fully anchored in the East, and he wasn't fully anchored in the West.
But here is the catch, and this is where we start getting into that Western first critique from the source material. His actual toolkit was incredibly European.
Very much so.
Our sources highlight 3 main Western thinkers he heavily leaned on. The first one is Giambattista Vico.
Right, the Italian philosopher. So Vico is crucial for Said because of his main principle, which is that men make their own history.
Meaning we can only truly know what we have built ourselves.
Exactly. And Said took that idea and completely weaponized it against the colonizers. He used it to prove that the Orient wasn't some mystical fixed reality just sitting out there waiting to be discovered.
It was a man-made construct.
Yes. It was a story Europe told itself.
Which is such a powerful intellectual move. It destabilizes their entire narrative. He's basically saying, you didn't discover the Orient, you invented it.
And then to explain how that invention took hold, he brings in Antonio Gramsci.
Gramsci's concept of hegemony.
Right, because you have to answer the question, why did everyone just accept colonial rule? It wasn't just about soldiers and guns.
It was cultural consent.
Spot on. Said he used Gramsci to show how Orientalism just saturated Western common sense. It became the water everyone was swimming in. It wasn't just politicians. It was the novelists, the teachers, the poets.
And then he brings up the heavy artillery, Michel Foucault.
Foucault and the concept of discourse.
The power-knowledge nexus.
Yes. Said used Foucault's theories to argue that writing a book about the East wasn't just some neutral scholarly act. It was an act of geopolitical power.
The power to represent is directly linked to the power to dominate.
If I can define you, I can control you.
So Said is taking all these heavy Western thinkers and turning their weapons right back on the West, reading contrapuntally, right?
Yeah, contrapuntal reading.
Right.
That's his core strategy. Reading a text with one eye on the metropolitan center like London or Paris, and the other eye on the colonial periphery.
Okay, so that is the Sadian architecture. But this is where the major critique comes in. The sources introduce this Marxist scholar, Ijaz Ahmad, who just relentlessly takes Sadat to task.
Ahmad's argument is basically, Edward, you are trying to have your cake and eat it too.
He calls it methodological eclecticism, which is quite a mouthful.
It is, but it makes sense when you break it down.
Yeah.
Ahmad points out that Said is trying to mix Foucault, who was a fierce anti-humanist, someone who believed individuals are basically just byproducts of systems, with high humanist philology, like Erich Auerbach.
And Auerbach believes in the total genius of the individual author.
Right, so logically, you can't really hold both of those positions at the same time. It's like mixing oil and water.
But Ahmad goes even further, right? He argues that Said's massive success in the West was no accident.
Not at all. He succeeded precisely because he was speaking their language, using their exact theoretical models.
Which leads right into the charge of political atheism. This part of the reading really struck me. The criticism here is that Said was so fiercely committed to secularism that he basically erased the significance of religion entirely.
That is a huge point of contention. Saidi viewed Islamic identity as unstable, basically just another social construct that could be manipulated.
He didn't engage with the theology.
No, he failed to engage with the actual theological substance of the culture he was defending. He treated Islam as this cultural archive you read, rather than a living, breathing moral system.
So in a way, he was more of an anthropologist of Europe than a true voice for the indigenous Orient.
That's the critique, yes.
And that brings us to the rupture. Enter Wael Hallaq. Because if Said is trying to pull up a chair to the table and argue his case using the table's own etiquette.
Hallaq is standing outside with a sledgehammer saying, "This table is rotten."
Exactly. Hallaq represents a radical departure. He essentially argues that Said didn't go nearly far enough.
Right, because Sid had critiqued the literature of the West, but he stayed totally enamored with its core values, secularism, liberalism, humanism.
Whereas Hallaq wants to dismantle the entire epistemic edifice.
And the centerpiece of this argument is his book, The Impossible State.
I just love that title.
Yeah.
Provocative. What exactly makes the state impossible?
His main thesis is that the very concept of an Islamic state is an oxymoron. It's a contradiction in terms. You physically cannot have one.
Why?
Because the modern nation-state is a highly specific European invention that is, in his words, fundamentally devoid of morality.
That is such a huge claim. So it's not just about, a specific dictator being bad. It's that the actual machinery of the state is incompatible with Islamic governance.
Completely incompatible. Hallaq breaks this down into 5 form properties of the modern state.
Okay, let's walk through these. First is sovereignty.
Right. In the modern state, the state itself has the ultimate will. But in the Islamic paradigm, God is the only sovereign, and humans are merely stewards.
Got it. Second is territoriality.
Borders define who you are in a modern state. But the Ummah, the community of believers, is defined by faith, not arbitrary lines drawn on a map.
Third is the monopoly on violence,
which the modern state claims exclusively. In pre-modern Islamic paradigms, force was far more decentralized and heavily moralized.
Then fourth, you have bureaucratic centralization, top-down control of literally everything.
Yes. And finally, the 5th one, which is absolutely critical, legal positivism.
Legal positivism. So this is the idea that the law is just a set of rules. It doesn't actually have to be moral or good. It just has to be the law.
Correct. And Hallaq contrasts this sharply with the Sharia. He describes Sharia not just as law in our rigid Western sense, but as a moral social logic that permeates every aspect of life.
Which brings us to the famous Isat distinction from the Enlightenment.
Exactly. The Enlightenment separated facts, what is, from values, what ought to be. Hallaq argues that pre-modern Islamic paradigms simply never made that split.
Ethics dominated everything. Politics, economics, science.
Right, they didn't relegate morality to the back seat, which Hallaq says led directly to our current moral predicament.
Now, here is a detail from the sources that is going to surprise a lot of people listening. It definitely surprised me. Wael Hallaq is not Muslim.
No, he is not.
Ah.
Wael Hallaq is a Palestinian Christian.
Which just blows my mind. You have arguably the world's leading scholar defending the Sharia and the pre-modern Islamic legal tradition, and he is a Christian. Why?
This is where his work gets incredibly fascinating. Hallaq isn't doing this to proselytize. He is arguing for true pluralism. As a Christian of the Levant, he looks back at the historical record and sees that the pre-modern Islamic legal tradition offered a framework where organic, peaceful coexistence was a reality for 13 centuries.
And the modern state just destroyed that.
Completely. The modern state demands homogenization. Everyone has to be flattened into the same kind of citizen.
So Hallaq argues that the Western mind didn't actually invent tolerance, it destroyed it.
Yes. He sees the Sharia not as some theocratic oppression, which is the stereotype, but as a robust shield that actually protected minorities far better than the Enlightenment veneer of the modern nation-state.
That really flips the script. We are so conditioned to hear that secularism equals safety for minorities. And he's saying, actually, let's look at the historical record.
It's a profound paradigm-shifting insight.
So we have these two radically different worldviews. Let's look at how they actually wage this intellectual warfare. It's essentially Said's method versus Hallaq's method.
You can visualize it as horizontal versus vertical critique.
Okay, unpack that.
Said is horizontal. He looks horizontally across the landscape at problematic European authors. He reads Flaubert, he reads Hemingway. He is criticizing the representations.
While Hallaq says that's just the tip of the iceberg.
Right. Hallaq goes vertical. He drills down into the deep structures of modern knowledge itself.
And the biggest blind spot in Said's work, according to Hallaq, is what he calls the silence of law.
Yes. Hallaq points out that Said virtually ignored the law. But the law was the single mechanism that actually made colonialism physically possible.
Right. It wasn't just bad novels that colonized the East.
Exactly. It was legal codes, the imposition of Western property laws, criminal codes, the entire administrative structure.
Hallaq literally calls this cultural genocide.
He does. Because it's the systematic elimination of a native way of being and thinking. By focusing so heavily on literature, Said totally missed the actual engine of the colonial machine.
There is also this fascinating debate in the sources about language and authenticity. Said wrote almost exclusively in English. He spoke to the powerful in their own tongue.
Which Hallaq thinks is a massive trap.
Because the language limits the thought.
Precisely. Hallaq argues that the English language itself severely limits your understanding of these concepts. Take the word Sharia. We almost always translate it as Islamic law. But law, in English Qanun, is a very state-centric, narrow, punitive concept. Sharia, historically, is a moral, ritualistic, all-encompassing way of life. When you translate it simply as law, you have already distorted it. You've already lost the argument before it begins.
The sources mention a comparison to Mahmoud Shaker here regarding this idea of language and belonging.
Yes, the Egyptian thinker. Shaker deeply believed that to truly understand a culture, a researcher needs empathy or belonging. You have to feel it from the inside out.
And Hallaq claims he has that insider knowledge.
He claims a level of intimacy with the Sharia archives that Said, as a secular, Western-trained literary critic, simply never possessed.
Hallaq even goes so far as to suggest Said should have used entirely different tools. He brings up René Guénon,
the founder of the traditional school. Guénon offered a devastating critique of modernity, but one based on ethical mores rather than secular liberalism.
So Hallaq is saying if Said had used Guénon instead of Foucault,
he might have been able to offer a truly subversive critique, one that didn't just rearrange the furniture inside the master's house, but actually showed the exit door.
Wow. Okay, so we've got Said throwing stones at the border, symbolically speaking, fighting for political and historical recognition.
And we have Hallaq focusing inward, trying to reconstruct the moral subject.
That is the ultimate contrast. Said's resistance is the stone. It's political. It's about restoring national history.
While Hallaq's resistance is the care of the self. It's ontological. It's about building a human being who simply refuses to be enslaved by modern desires, global capitalism, and the state apparatus.
But the big question for you listening, do we actually have to choose? I mean, this is a masterclass focused on global awakening. Is there a synthesis here? The sources introduce what they call a third argument from Muhannad al-Hubail.
Yes, this is where we attempt to bridge that massive gap. Al-Hubail suggests that we don't have to choose between Foucault and Sharia in this rigid binary way.
Instead, he advocates for focusing on shared universal moral values.
Right. He views Islam not just as a religion in the narrow private sense, but as a potential panacea for the moral crisis of modernity.
Offering values that have been totally stripped from modern politics. Humility, stewardship, gratitude.
Exactly. It's about engaging the East and West in a genuinely constructive, ethical conversation, rather than just a shout fest over representations.
So when we circle all the way back to that original Western First accusation against Edward Said, what is the final verdict from our sources?
The source material offers a very balanced, nuanced conclusion, epistemologically.
Us.
Said was Western first.
He was the fish who didn't fully realize he was swimming in Western water.
Exactly. He was using their tools.
Okay.
But nationalistically, no. His core burning concern was always Palestine.
So his Westernness was just a tactical asset.
It was. It allowed him to get a seat at the table. It allowed him to be heard in New York and London.
He was a Trojan horse.
In many ways, yes. But, and this is Hallaq's lingering warning, the Trojan horse might be infected with the very virus you're trying to fight.
Which is a chilling thought. So to bring this all together for everyone tuning in, we are looking at two very different but maybe complementary models of the Palestinian intellectual.
Two mutually enhancing ways of being. Said fights for a seat at the modern table. He demands the critique of representation. He's saying, stop lying about us and let us speak for ourselves.
While Hallaq fights to build a completely different table, he demands the critique of modern knowledge. He's saying your entire system of knowing and governing is morally bankrupt. We need to return to something ethical.
One is fighting for basic rights within the world as it currently exists. The other is fighting for a world as it ought to be.
And given the current moral predicament we see everywhere, environmental collapse, endless conflicts, this massive crisis of meaning, I think the underlying argument here is that both of these voices are indispensable.
You absolutely need the sharp political elbows of Said to clear the room.
But you need the architectural blueprints of Hallaq to build a room actually worth living in.
Well said.
So as we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final provocation to mull over. Something not explicitly in these texts, but built on them.
Let's hear it.
If the modern state relies on physical territoriality and rigid bureaucratic centralization, like Hallaq argues what happens now with the rise of the digital borderless surveillance state, does artificial intelligence and global digital hegemony make Hallaq's focus on the physical state obsolete? Or does it make the master's tools even more dangerous, making a return to indigenous ethical heritage the only way to survive the digital panopticon?
Now that is a question that really forces you to rethink what liberation looks like in the 21st century. Is the goal to win the game, or do we have to change the rules entirely before the game plays us?
Exactly. Thank you so much for breaking all of this down with me today.
It was a pleasure.
And thank you to you, our listeners, for joining this first session of the Resistance 101 Masterclass. There's a lot to digest here, so take some time, reflect on the concepts, and we will see you in the next session.